good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on from where you are watching, and welcome at IMPAKT TV. IMPAKT TV is a series of monthly online events in which we reflect on the most striking events and current developments in art, technology, and the media. And we always do that with a special guest, and today we have a very special guest, which is Zach Blas. Zach Blas is an artist, filmmaker, and writer whose practice spans across moving image, computation, queer theory, performance, and science fiction. He currently works as an assistant professor of visual studies at the University of Toronto. Blas has exhibited, lectured, and held screenings at venues internationally, including Tate Modern, the Walker Art Center, and of course also here at IMPAKT. And we are very happy to have him with us today. So welcome, Zach Blas, joining us from London.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Zach.
How are you today?
Good. My spring/summer allergies are kicking in a little bit, but I think I'm going to be able to pull through today for you.
Thank you so much. So today we'll talk with you, together with Arjan, about the politics of technology, about Silicon Valley, which seems to be a very recurring thread in your work, Zach. We'll talk about microdosing, biometrics, and queer critique, and more. We'll discuss some of the key themes in your practice and also how you combine your research activities also with your artistic work. And we're not the only ones asking questions, because actually if you're watching, we would very much like to encourage you to also take the opportunity to ask your questions yourself. And you can do that via the chat or to email your question via questions@impact.nl or scan the QR code that you see now on the screen.
And we'll talk about some of your works, especially The Doors and 576 Tears, very recent work you made. The Doors, a work that is also included in a project that IMPAKT still has online, but also talk with you about some recommendations, works by others that you find inspiring. So that's a bit the course of tonight's event, and hopefully with the audience questions included. But let's get started with maybe our questions, and we could start with the first thing that you sent us when we asked you, is there anything by another artist or something cultural that has influenced you, that is important to you? You mentioned one thing that we'll get to later. That's this Chinese film, I should say Taiwanese film, sorry, The River. But you also sent us a song by Tori Amos. We're going to play it at the end of the episode of tonight's screening, tonight's show, as an outro, so to say. And it's the song "Cruel." Maybe let's get started with why. What does that song mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I could probably spend the next 50 minutes talking about what Tori Amos means to me, because it's complex. But, I guess I should begin this by saying, I think of Tori Amos as kind of like my queer mother in a way. And I should also say that when I'm talking about Tori Amos, I'm definitively remaining within the 1990s and not referring to any of her musical production past the 1990s. But I was a queer kid growing up in Appalachia, which is kind of the American South, very rural, working class. And I'm also from this part of America that's known as the Bible Belt. And I also studied piano from a very young age. So, if you know anything about Tori Amos, you know that her music in the 90s dealt with things like religion. She plays the piano. There was a lot of interesting elements in the work about the feminism, being silenced, certainly a certain kind of queerness, powerful, desire. I mean, so many things. But I really, yeah, I discovered Tori when I was around 15 or 16. And it really changed my life. And I would say her music really saved me when I was a teenager and growing up in that part of America. It's very hard to kind of even try to get myself back into that mindset of what it was like to be living there, because being isolated and living somewhere very remote at that period of time, had a very different feel. We had a very kind of shaky internet connection at best. Like, this ability to kind of connect with other people was quite suspended in that part of the world. But I was deeply attracted to her music, and I also kind of became a Tory groupie when I was kind of basically between 1998 and 1999. So the ages of kind of 16 and 17, when I was still in high school. And I essentially kind of ran away from home and went to like over 100 Tori Amos concerts and pretty much traveled all over the US seeing her. And it was definitely, it was amazing. It was the first time I met other queer people, because the concerts in the 90s really attracted a very strong kind of alternative queer following. And so that was really special to me. And I also think the music was healing and empowering at the same time. So this song, Cruel, I selected because, well, it's on this album from 1999 called To Venus and Back, which is a double CD. And the second CD is a live, it's basically a compilation of songs from this 1998 tour that I heavily followed when I was 16. And I've always been really attracted to this song, Cruel, and, more attracted to it, not necessarily for the words, but it captures a certain kind of intensity that I've always been quite attracted to. There's a quote that Tori said at some point in her career that always kind of resonated with me, was that her music is straight men can't stand her music because it's too emotionally raw and intense. And, I do think there is this quality of emotional intensity, this too muchness to her that has clearly really affected me. And I see it manifest in a lot of my work, because I think actually as I continue with my practice, I'm kind of always wanting this too muchness quality in a lot of the work that I make. And, my experience as a teacher as well, it's a common critique I hear from queer students in the arts, that other professors have told them that their work is too much. And very attracted to this. But I also shared Cruel with you because there's another more conceptual, maybe theoretical side to that song that I'm intrigued by as I listen to it now with the current work that I've been making. And I guess we'll get into this more with 576 Tears, and also the work that I'm premiering, basically like in 7 or 8 days at the Berlin Biennial, which is a work about crying and emotion recognition. And, listening to Tori's music really makes me think about, can emotions be totally and fully captured by algorithmic systems? And there's this part in the live version of the song where she sings variations on this phrase, deeper, I can go deeper than you, deeper into me. But just this evocation of this idea of deeper touches on a lot of things. I mean, I think it holds interesting contradictions. It makes me think about being able to feel a certain kind of emotional depth that might actually come from being a minoritarian subject or experiencing certain kinds of oppression or forms of violence. But also, it makes me think of this kind of idea of algorithmic extraction, and this attempt to kind of plunge deeper into the depths of a human in order to extract emotions and kind of turn that into data in the service of these algorithms, kind of ever refining and refining, kind of developing themselves. So that song holds a lot. I think it's interesting for me personally, emotionally, and conceptually and theoretically.
And I'm also curious to ask, I need to know, you followed Tori around for a year. Have you ever met her?
Yes, of course, I have.
And was it what you
I
hoped it would
actually,
be?
yeah, it was actually. I met her a few times when I was a teenager because Tori was known. I mean, I think she still is, but at that time in the '90s, she was known for being really generous to her fans and would always do these meet and greets before every concert. And so, kind of the like diehard Tori fans would always gather before concerts, and she would come out and say hi to everyone and talk to people, take song requests. People would give her things. So I remember the first time I met her was um, uh, somewhere in 1998. I don't remember, but then I do remember this one instance in 1999 in Nashville in Tennessee. um, I had made this art book. And I made these books when I was a teenager where I would take photos, write poetry and short stories, collage different things. And I had made this book that was probably a couple hundred pages, and I made a copy of it for her. And I gave it to her. And I remember she stood there and looked through it. And there was a photo I had taken of myself um, covered in fake blood or something really, definitely in the vein of queer too muchness. And I remember she smiled and laughed and really liked it. And yeah, so I had some really nice, of course, like brief and fleeting, but yeah, it was special.
We'll play the song at the end, and I'm sure we'll, during the interview, get back maybe also because it's so very, very much about your childhood, and of course still parts of those that childhood is relevant for what you now do. But maybe we jump to the Doors that we already announced, a work that exists as an installation, but it's also represented as a video in the video project, the internet project, Weird Noses, that is still available online at Impact, weirdnoses.impact.nl. Let's have a look, about 2 minutes of the piece, so the audience gets an impression, and then we can talk more about it.
The garden has a strange atmosphere. The trees and the flowers, bright and striking, their separateness and the effervescence of their fragrance illustrate the infinite potency of neurotransmitters within our brains. Perfect for anyone looking for calm, rejuvenating hypnagogic chemicals. There are many monsters within. A leaf blossom, shiny as seen from above, calling all demons. The scientists of the island, the silvery creature in the yard. The mind is king, wandering, starving. Science not hunger, mitochondrial biogenesis, antioxidant defenses. In this giant glass, we have the power to change your mind. We join the armies of the new heaven, and we will return to land and replace our obsolete fuel cells.
Yeah, a little bit of the opening of the video. Maybe you could start with just taking us into the piece sharing a bit of what got you started on it, and tell us more about the work.
Sure. I had made a film in 2018 that looked at the figure of Ayn Rand, who is a Russian philosopher and novelist that moved to America early on in her career and went on to write novels like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, which are quite championed broadly across the right wing in the US, but also by industries like tech and Hollywood. And I was really interested in Ayn Rand because I was making this film that was a reimagining of this queer British filmmaker Derek Jarman's 1978 punk classic Jubilee, in which Queen Elizabeth I time travels to see this kind of post-apocalyptic future England. And I wanted to make a film that was about who I saw was the philosophical queen of Silicon Valley. And to me, that's Ayn Rand. And, I think in the American context, you can't underestimate the vast, sweeping influence of her writing and thought, which you can just so deeply connect to, tenets of individualism in America, kind of obsession, capitalist consumer culture. And, after making this film, diving into Ayn Rand, and I feel like I opened up so many doors making that film that, I decided to make a work off the doors. But really, I realized that that film, which is called Contra Internet Jubilee 2033, was the prologue to a trilogy of works, which I'm in the process of making. So The Doors is the first work in this trilogy about the fantasies and beliefs that kind of motivate and drive Silicon Valley, influence their visions of how they build technologies, how they imagine technologies work, what are their visions of the future with these technologies. And the very first thing I knew I wanted to confront was psychedelia. And, there are certain things, certain types of, subcultures, you could call them, that have been very present in the San Francisco Bay Area, which includes Silicon Valley, since all of this kind of started with the evolution of tech in that region. So since the start, this certain kind of, like, we could say, hippie mentality has always been connected to tech entrepreneurial culture. And, a historian like Fred Turner, has kind of really unpacked this in his own scholarly work. So, what basically was striking me with this, interest in the psychedelic subculture and how I saw it actually emerging today is, thinking about, I guess, the connection between drugs, artificial intelligence, and Silicon Valley ideology and work culture today. And I guess, to put it bluntly, I wanted to make a work that confronted what I considered to be kind of a second wave of psychedelia that is actually taking place in the same geographical region as the San Francisco Bay Area. So that's interesting, where in the 60s, we had this, kind of burst of psychedelic activity, which we're all super familiar with. We kind of know the hippie ideals that, kind of emerged out of this time. The promise of experimenting with psychedelic drugs as a kind of way of expanding consciousness, certain types of communal living, right? And one of the main drugs within this, these moments of experimentation in the 60s was LSD. So now we're in the same geographical region. It's the present. We could even say we start in somewhere like 2017, 2018, and Silicon Valley and that region of California starts becoming at the forefront of a new drug trend. That drug trend essentially kind of bifurcates into two paths. On the one hand, you have microdosing on LSD or psilocybin mushrooms, otherwise known as magic mushrooms, and also the burgeoning nootropics industry, which are various types of smart drugs that are designed to enhance cognitive capacity. Essentially, to maybe make you read faster, process, kind of essentially enhance, speed up cognitive skills and any kind of work that would be associated with that. So, I mean, what's interesting there then is you have this kind of re-engineering of psychedelic drugs that are not, right, not necessarily about getting naked in Golden Gate Park and dancing around and imagining about the collective potential of expanding consciousness. Rather, you have this kind of right particular approach to psychedelic drugs, and also how they manifest in a legal commercial way through nootropics, to basically take drugs to essentially become a better neoliberal worker. So that was the interest to me, that psychedelic drugs suddenly become optimized for a certain kind of work culture and political outlook that suits Silicon Valley's vision. And so I wanted to make a work about that. Essentially, I guess the question of the work, or what I wanted to create with the work, was I wanted to have people experience a psychedelic trip on nootropics. And so, that's, I guess, the kind of conceptual scaffolding. Again, like a lot of these works, there's everything in 5 kitchen sinks. So, I could talk about this from so many different angles. But maybe it's worth just saying a little something about the doors, because usually with a lot of my work, I want there to be a lot of kind of, complex theoretical conceptual thinking, but I often want some kind of pop angle as a way and a framing device into this work. So for me, that became the band The Doors. And actually, there's a personal connection there, because my father was a hippie and I grew up listening to The Doors. I mean, it's kind of like totally, that music is just ingrained within my psyche. And so, in like kind of the indirect way, I thought of this work as like a kind of love letter to my father, even though it's using the Doors in a very conceptual way. And so, right, the Doors, why this interest in the Doors? Well, I thought what was, of course, striking about them is, where they get their name from to begin with, which the Doors is this legendary, California psychedelic rock band that was active during the 60s, and they take their name from a book written in the 1950s by the British writer Aldous Huxley called The Doors of Perception, in which he documents his experiments with mescaline, which is also a psychedelic drug in California. So thinking about the doors of perception, and that's an interesting question to me, to think, what are the doors of perception today? And in this installation, which I can practically describe soon, you see these essentially kind of black glass screens hanging. And so, one of the things these screens were meant to evoke is, the interfaces of our phones, or also often when our computers are off, we stare back at a kind of black, shiny screen. And this is also to create a tension with architecture in Silicon Valley. Because if we look at all the new buildings that are emerging with major corporations, whether it's Apple, Google, Amazon, we see this like kind of modernist return to all glass architecture. So the headquarters of all these buildings are all transparent glass, attempting to craft and create some kind of unmediated relationship with nature. And, I wanted to kind of work with glass in this installation, but not use transparent glass, and kind of work with black opaque glass as a way to create kind of counterpoint to this idea of seamless mediation between nature and technology. And I think this work is attempting to provoke and bring forward like lots of different ideas of the artificial that are at the core of Silicon Valley, even though everything is attempted to be presented in such a kind of naturalized, normal way. And so, I could also just interrupt me whenever you want. But
well, maybe a point I would like to continue on. You're mentioning, well, the Doors in several ways. You're mentioning psychedelics, how this glass architecture is presenting a certain worldview, a certain ideology in a sense. I'm wondering also, how do you view this in relation to spirituality? Is technology becoming the new spirituality, and how does your work, or this work in particular, engage with that?
Sure. Well, I think, it's kind of the same thing as kind of psychedelic culture and hippie culture. Also what's been entangled with California, the California tech industry forever is kind of a kind of fringe spirituality and new age spirituality, right? California is the place where you have cults, alternative religions, the popularity of new age beliefs. And so, absolutely, this is another part of this work. And maybe it's helpful, before I dive into that any further, if I just kind of explain practically what you're looking at, because then I'll explain, if you kind of see the symbol on the floor is the way into talking about spirituality in this work. So the installation is a 6-channel video installation, and it's designed to feel like a kind of corporate mystical garden, something kind of private, sacred, and closed. But it's also meant to evoke a kind of contemporary reimagining of a psychedelic liquid light show, which is, in the 60s, you would go sit on a beanbag, smoke a joint, and look at, kind of abstract imagery kind of moving around. So this work kind of oscillates between two different types of material where, you see these lizards moving around in this garden, and then it goes to these abstract kind of sequences. And, we can talk about the lizards next, but to get to the religious point, if you walk up to this what I call drug menagerie in the center of this installation that has a set of nootropics that are all commercially available. And I actually collected most of these between the UK and the US, and of course, I collected them for over a year, took them to kind of experiment and see what they would do. But what is really interesting to me is the labeling and the branding on these products. And
I see already unfair advantage there.
Yeah, unfair advantage. I mean, one of my favorites is Obedient × 3, which comes in Snow Cone flavor. I mean, but of course, this unfair advantage, very Ayn Randian, but also there's this other nootropic. It's called Eternus, and it's actually right below Nutru. And this Eternus bottle, it's green, and yeah, it's right there. So this is by a more high-end nootropics company based out, I think, in La Jolla, in California, called the Neurohacker Collective. And if you look closely at this logo is basically an altered Metatron's cube. And I was really struck by that, and actually kind of the arrogance of this, because a Metatron's cube is a symbol within sacred geometry. And it's meant to represent all the flows of energy in the entire universe, right? Yeah, sorry, this is another version of the Metatron's cube. So I kind of love that this nootropics company has as a logo a symbol that supposedly holds all the energy in the world, which apparently you're going to get access to if you take one of their nootropics. But so what I wanted to do in this installation is to make these connections kind of formally felt and visible. So in this installation, there's a symbol cut on the floor out of artificial grass. And that symbol is the kind of Metatron's cube unaltered. So you have kind of the unaltered Metatron's cube that is essentially this kind of organizational framework that holds this entire installation within it. And then, if you spend time kind of looking at the details of this exhibition or this installation, because it's certainly detail oriented, you'll start to kind of maybe see that connection between the similarity of these branding logos with well-known symbol from sacred geometry. And yes, here's another symbol too. Not sacred geometry.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned seeing this as a second wave of psychedelia, connecting it also with neoliberalism. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also maybe a lot of differences, and that maybe ties in with a question that we got in from Friso Wiersum. Actually, it's two questions. I'll read them out to you, and maybe you can respond to them. So about microdosing has turned psychedelics into a work-enhancing tool. Is there anything California cannot turn into something that serves economic reasoning? And the other question connecting, I guess, to it, in his book, The Conquest of Cool, by Thomas Frank, Thomas Frank argued counterculture had to turn into a commodity with its emphasis on the individual liberation. How could a new we grow into existence, and how could that new culture not be commodified? So maybe, I mean, it's also what I see, that this hippie counterculture that was all at least in my maybe idealistic vision on it, all but commercialized. It was a counterculture, and now we see these drug-enhancing substances. In the end, as you say, used by people to perform better in a neoliberal system. So maybe you respond a bit to the two questions that I read out to you.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'm really thankful for those questions because they actually let us kind of think about the other side of this, which is, I think this work and a lot of the work I've been doing recently is, I guess, trying to present structures of power kind of inflected through these fantasies and belief systems that are driving them. But at the same time, presenting the structure of power doesn't necessarily mean that there's not an outside or another way or, some type of resistant activity happening in relationship to them. So, maybe the first point I would say is, it's also, I think, my interest in making work about California is because I lived there for basically all of my 20s. And I feel, this might not be always apparent about the work because I don't always obviously put myself in the work. But when I'm making work, I think about how can I make a work on this that I ask myself, should I make this work? And if I'm going to make this work, I need to kind of understand like my positioning in relationship to the topic. So making work on California just made sense to me, given my own personal history and connection to it. And, partially I'm also saying that is because I also love California. I kind of focus on this one element of it, but I also felt California was one of the queerest places I've ever lived and one of the places that I felt the most joy in my life. And I definitely miss living there. And that's just to kind of say that I think California holds a lot. It holds a lot of contradictions. It holds culture beyond this. Then on the other hand, I think it's important to say that I'm not anti-drug. Hey, I'm happy to do LSD. I'm not even necessarily against, the idea of cognitive enhancing drugs. It's, what I'm interested in and critical about in the work is the right kind of social and cultural kind of conditioning and framing in which it emerges within this particular industry. So just want to be clear on that this isn't an anti-drug project. And so on that note, I think, someone that was actually thinking really interestingly about this question of kind of a different type of collective, a way of thinking against commodification is actually the late Mark Fisher, who used to be my colleague here in London at Goldsmiths when I was still in the Department of Visual Cultures. And when Mark died, he was working on an idea called acid communism. And this has since been, like a little excerpt of this has since been published in the collected writings of his called K-Punk. And this idea of acid communism, essentially, Mark, I think what caught his attention with the psychedelic 60s was that it was a moment when altering consciousness went mainstream. And one of his main arguments today was actually this need, to be able to alter consciousness, right? His previous book was called Capitalist Realism. What happens when capitalism is a form of realism and you can see no alternative or outside. So I think he took this, kind of interesting inspiration from psychedelia as a way of engineering, altering consciousness. And this doesn't have to be, necessarily by taking drugs. And I really like this idea. I like this kind of promise that's still there with this idea of psychedelia. And, I think I've also gravitated to making work about this because I also have always really liked psychedelic things. It's like, always kind of taken that like very seriously. So in the work, I mean, it's kind of hard to get into this because we'd have to see like kind of really specific kind of video clips and things, but the work does try to gesture towards this. It's a 50-minute, 6-channel, kind of video installation. It's quite long, but there's a moment where it tries to open up this other way of thinking about a different kind of psychedelic possibility or potentiality.
I think what's interesting is that your work is also in a way exposing how these psychedelic drugs or substances that were maybe initially used to release control, to have a more free experience, are now in a way also becoming a way of controlling our bodies and controlling our minds, controlling our performance even more. Maybe another element of the work is the lizards, and I think there's also a lot to say about that. The lizards. Well, maybe first say, why did you chose to have this as sort of the main persona in the video?
Sure. With a lot of my work, I like to have characters. I like to have narrators. And I wanted this work because it was one of the most conceptual, abstract works I've ever made. I wanted there to be a character that guided us through this landscape of histories collapsing in on each other, future pathways opening. And I chose the lizard because I felt like the lizard was actually the creature that could time travel between now and the first psychedelic era in the 60s. And the reason I say that is because on the one hand, we have Jim Morrison, the frontman of the band The Doors, famously called himself the Lizard King. He says, "I am the Lizard King. I can do anything." This kind of, I think this kind of imagining of a certain kind of psychedelic mode of transformation, liberation. Of course, problematic because Jim Morrison often, appropriated ideas and concepts from indigenous cultures within the American Southwest. But anyway, regardless, however problematic, you still do have this lizard as a kind of key symbol from that moment in the 1960s. But then if we look today at the lizard, actually the lizard is quite popular today, but in a very different way. On the one hand, we have anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists like David Icke, like here in England, writing books like Children of the Matrix, and propagating this idea that all political figures are secretly an ancient alien race. So kind of developing these strange right-wing conspiracy theories about a secret lizard alien race that is taking over. And of course, we also see the lizard in like various types of meme culture kind of associated with this. So this was like, really my interest, that I guess today we could say the lizard is somehow like at the kind of forefront of like internet meme warfare around these politics. And another thing I could say about the lizard today that's quite interesting is it's manifested in different types of queer culture. So if anyone's familiar with the channel ContraPoints run by Natalie Wynn, she would, in her early videos on what is capitalism, the capitalist figures were often presented as these lizard creatures in business suits, and she would call them the reptilian overlords. Queer filmmaker Gregor Rocky has often brought in kind of strange lizard figures within his films. So, there's just a really interesting thread of the lizard. I could kind of keep going more with like interesting queer subcultural things, but I guess for me, I was just really struck by how, we could see this proliferation of meanings between these two periods. So I wanted this lizard to come in and, be this time-traveling character between these two time periods. And the lizard is actually given the voice of Jim Morrison in the installation. So I worked with a team of machine learning engineers, and we trained a neural network on maybe like 3 hours of Jim Morrison's speaking voice to basically get the kind of timbres of his voice generated. And then we use that as the basis, for giving this lizard its voice.
I have tons of other questions about the Doors, but we could also now step to this next work that you just premiered, and maybe get back to the Doors later. But maybe we discuss a bit 576 Tears, which is an online work, and people can see it on the internet. I think you were in an online interview the day before yesterday. I don't know if that was the premiere or just part of launching the work. Please tell us a bit about this piece, and maybe also, if you want, preview a bit on what you will do in Berlin with the Berlin Biennial.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this work emerged out of research I was doing for the second work in my trilogy, in my Silicon Valley trilogy, which is about AI and religion. And as I was researching this, I, kind of ended up following two passive research at the same time, which just ended up meeting each other. And that was doing research around emotion recognition. And then, at the same time as I was doing religious research, I kept coming up against material about crying and religious weeping as a form of kind of divine or pious communication with God. So there was something about these two things that, seem to have some kind of like parallel relation or dynamic. Of course, it's not a one-to-one. It's an artwork. It's got to be a little bit messier than that, this relation. But what I mean is there's something about emotion recognition where we are kind of offering up our emotions willingly, unwillingly, but, very much in a kind of like mundane, day-to-day way at this point. And we offer up our emotions to, AI-driven systems, whether that's smartphones, social media platforms, etc. And that becomes training data to, kind of like further develop these technologies. And often, that also services the kind of broader political goal of Silicon Valley, which is, all of this kind of AI development is in the service of these more kind of fantastical premises of like, attempting to create intelligence that transcends human biology or embodiment. But then on the other hand, if you think about this idea of like religious weeping, where you're also attempting to kind of conjure up something from the depths and, externalize that through tears as a way of some kind of supposed perfect, mode of communicating with God. And, also tears, just it really struck me as a really interesting symbol because, of course, tears are deeply symbolic. So what would it mean to think about tears as a symbol for all the different types of emotional extraction that are required and demanded and kind of forced for AI systems to work and develop. So, on the one hand, I'm referring to like the very kind of practical, technical training that's required of an AI system to kind of learn emotions. But on the other hand, I'm thinking just much more kind of broadly about kind of AI or tech as an industry and all the kind of emotion that has to be kind of harnessed and gathered. I kind of think of different scenarios. I imagine like tech elite experiencing extreme joy, happy with their like, kind of having economic inequality and being rich off of these technologies. Or you can think of people expressing fear towards, kind of predatory AI systems like predictive policing, anger, if you've been automated out of a job, etc. So just a kind of really broad, multifaceted way of thinking about emotions and I guess kind of extraction in relationship to all of this. And, just
Zach?
as I was saying, yes.
Yeah, I have a question also responding to what you just said, and maybe also to a line that I read in your bio. I think it's on your website. Zach Blas engages the materiality of digital technologies while also drawing out the philosophies and imaginaries lurking in artificial intelligence, biometric recognition, predictive policing, airport security, the internet, and biological warfare. On the one hand, I'm always a bit in between seeing the potential dangers of these kinds of technologies and seeing how disappointing bad they still perform at this point. How do you see, for instance, artificial emotion recognition? Do you see it as very accurate already? Or even how clumsy it may be, being a potential dangerous if applied in the wrong way? Maybe you could respond to that, but also a bit broader question, what do you see as the main phenomena to be scrutinized if we look at the philosophies and imaginaries of contemporary technological developments?
Sure. Yes. So, I'm sorry. What was the first question again? My brain just shut. My brain just shut off into
Yeah,
different things
let's
all at once.
say, is this glass half empty or half full?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, I've got it. So, I mean, yes. I mean, I think emotion recognition is pretty crap. But I mean, that's also what I was really interested in. So, this website uses just kind of standard emotion recognition, and basically, you've got 6 options that can be detected, which are anger, surprise, sadness, joy, disgust. I always forget one, and I'm doing it right now. But incredibly limited. And of course, if you use this site, you'll see you probably you think you're expressing one thing and another emotion is detected. So, I'm in this work, I'm interested in that. It's not trying to present some kind of perfect mode of emotion recognition. And I think just, kind of say like practically what the work is, I think of the work I guess maybe as a speculative story. And the kind of website itself is an imagined AI god that kind of shares its origin story and religious belief with you. And basically, if you participate in its emotion recognition system, it basically makes you cry and then collects those tears. So it's kind of this idea that this AI god is attempting to study technically and religiously and philosophically, tears as a way to, attempt to reach some kind of like a perfect endpoint of kind of computing emotion. So within that, what do I think are the, I don't know, like key kind of issues and points or philosophies, beliefs that I think are worth kind of being interrogated? I mean, I guess I think the answer is in the work, because that's at least for me that's what I'm spending time on. And I guess what I could say to that is there's a particular way of doing technological critique, which could be which is quite common in academic forms of writing, where you look practically and technically about how a technology works, and then you can say, look, there's all this hype around this technology, but actually look how poorly biometrics recognizes certain sets of faces. You could do another type of critique, which is to look at the social and political impact of how technologies are, various technologies, whether it's AI or biometrics, etc., are affecting populations. I guess I want to take with this work a little bit of a different approach, which is trying to lean into these fantasies and beliefs and kind of represent these technologies that are not where those belief systems are not always super forefronted, and really kind of tease them out as a way to make those more felt, more kind of understood. And then, hopefully the work is framed in a way where, there is, it's understood that that's a critical gesture. And yeah, and I think, I don't know, I also just think I just don't see a lot of this work also. We're very familiar with the forms of technological critique out there. But I don't see as much, kind of engaging with what undergirds all of that. Which are things like religious and spiritual belief, which are things like it being invested in, the kind of psychedelic journey and what it could potentially offer. So, yeah, there's some. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Just to interrupt you and to expand on that, because I think you're pointing at a very interesting tension there as well. This work is about emotion recognition. You've made previous works on other forms of biometrics, such as facial recognition, the Face Cases project, but also facial weaponization suite. And you often take a very critical approach there, also, I would say, a feminist approach and a queer approach. But at the same time, you're also not scared, or you don't seem to be scared to use these technologies for making your critique. So I tried this project out myself. I had to open my camera and I had my face to be recognized, or at least my emotions to be captured in a sense. How do you deal as an artist with that tension? That on the one hand, you're critical of the technology, but you're also in a way using it as an artistic tool?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a purist, and I'm also not a neo-Luddite. And, I definitely reject the premise that you can't use the tool that you're critiquing. Also, there's a certain kind of arrogance there that it doesn't work for me because, we're all deeply embedded in these technologies and these systems. It's not even a question of individual agency. So, we're totally immersed. Of course, I'm interested and invested in alternatives, but at the same time, I'm a human. I have desires. I want to connect with people, and I end up using corporate technology and corporate platforms to do that because my desire to connect and communicate with friends and loved ones, it's there, and I'm not going to kind of totally fully suppress that. Of course, there's lots of little different things one can do, whether it's, communicating through, particular apps, doing this or that. But, at the same time, we always kind of find our way back in to these platforms and systems one way or the other. And I also, maybe it's interesting, Rosa, that you brought up that earlier work, because I really made a shift, I think, from earlier projects like Facial Weaponization Suite, which I think are much more in a kind of 90s tactical media modality of trying to, put forward like something that exists somewhere between a conceptual object and a political tool. And, I think as an artist, you don't always have to have the answer, even if it's like kind of pseudo conceptual answer. And I think, with my practice, it's been really important to liberate myself from that kind of responsibility. It doesn't mean that I don't want that. I would love to come up with an answer, but I think I'm also interested in really difficult, complex political topics that, there's no way I'm going to be able to figure this out on my own. And I think, I recognize the limitations of my work. I'm aware of what it can do and what it's not doing, but I also think of my work in dialogue with other people, other artists, other thinkers, writers, and activists. And if kind of change is going to happen, it's going to be through the kind of collective, collective creation and conversation of all these different people working on similar topics and political urgencies through their own ways, inclinations, positionings, etc. So that's really where I feel like I'm at right now. And, of course, I think this will change, and I do hope it changes because it's boring to make the same kind of work and way over and over. So, I'm sure if we talk again in 5 years, hopefully I'll be somewhere different and thinking about different things and taking on different strategies. But right now I'm very much in in looking at the beliefs and fantasies of the tech industry.
Maybe, we're getting towards the end of the show. People that want to ask questions, you still can. We just keyed in the email address and the QR code. You wanted to share, we asked you and invited you to share artworks that you found relevant, that inspired you, that you've seen recently, impressed recently. Your choice of works also made me a bit wonder about your, let's say, current state of mind, because they were all a bit sad. And you shared with us already, like you had to leave the UK, or you left the UK, which was not an easy step for you to do. You're now based in Toronto, in Canada. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how you experienced this time of your life, if your choice of works is somehow connected to it, because the film that you wanted to share with our audience is The River by Taiwanese director Tsai Ming Liang. I saw the trailer. We'll have a look at the trailer. It's not like it's sad work, maybe I should say, so maybe you tell us a bit about here. Even it's referred to as his bleakest film, so let's call it a bleak film. Maybe you tell us a bit why you selected these works and how you see yourself now moving from the UK to Canada.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I think it's safe to say I've been sad. I mean, I think a lot of people have been sad in the last 2 years. And I also think, that's clearly what led me to make a work on crying. I don't think it's, just, it's not a coincidence that I became interested in making a work about tears. But yes, leaving London was very bittersweet. I didn't want to leave, but, I think post-Brexit England leaves a lot to be desired. I really do think of like, if, I could split my spirit in half would be in Los Angeles and half would be in London. And, here I am in London right now, the second I could, leave Toronto. I mean, look, Toronto is like, to be determined. I don't know. I think I could say, we are aloof with each other currently, but I'm hoping that changes. But I do think my heart will always lie in London and LA. Mm-hmm. But that said, I shared this film from 1997, The River by Simon Liang, because number one, I really watch a lot more film than I look at art. I'm actually way more interested in cinema, and the proportions are probably, I feel like I take in 80% film, 20% art. And so cinema is a huge reference point for me. It always has been. I was originally trained in filmmaking and directing.
Zach, you're not the first artist to tell that he or she is actually much more interested in cinema. I wonder, is it the complexity of making a feature film, the team, the budget that you need that keeps you, or is it just loving to see video films but liking to make art? Or why are you not a filmmaker?
Well, I think, okay, the answer to that is with film, I love all elements of that. And definitely for me personally, I find film to be the most philosophical medium. And it's partially how it can hold complexity, which I'm very attracted to. But, why am I not a filmmaker? Because it's fucking expensive. And, when I finished film school, when I was like 21, I didn't know what the hell to do. I was trained in analog film. I mean, we didn't do anything digital. And I mean, to actually marshal that kind of capital just seemed utterly impossible. And I didn't want to work in the film industry. That's not, especially the American one, like over my dead body. So, I think I got more into art because art felt more accessible. You could make whatever you could based on the means that you had. And, I finally did make a film. I finished film school in 2004, made my first film in 2018, 14 years later. I mean, I'm actually working on a feature film script. So, I would like to be a filmmaker, but, for whatever reason, that just hasn't presented itself, to a degree, maybe the degree that I'd be interested in. But, we'll see, But just to say about the film The River,
Zach, before we could watch the little trailer, so people have some idea what you are talking about, and then please go ahead and share your thoughts with us. But let's first have a short look at The River, the trailer of the film.
about that is I like the emotional complexity of Ming Liang's work. You know, there's a queerness to his work that really speaks to me. But you know, for The River, I mean, actually for a lot of his films, rain is very, very prevalent. So with The River, I think because I'd been doing all this work on tears and crying, it kind of resurfaced for me because I was thinking about how amazing that film is, as how it uses liquid, water, rivers as a way to, you know, present emotional complexity and turmoil, and also kind of queer struggle, or the kind of struggle with queer desire. So I just find it incredibly moving and touching work, and also because I'm thinking so much about emotions these days. You know, I think it's a very sophisticated emotional film, and a very queer one.
Thanks a lot. We're getting towards the end of our show. I don't know, Rosa, if you have any pressing questions. Otherwise, we could.
Yeah, can I ask a short one still? Because this is just a topic we haven't. It comes across constantly in what you're talking, that you're interested in queer culture, that you're taking queer perspective. How would you define your own approach to queer critique? What does it mean for you?
I mean, that's changed over the years, and I think, you know, I actually think this is common with, I mean, not all queer artists, but certainly with some queer artists, where, you know, maybe the earlier work seems so obviously queer because it touches on things that we're familiar with in queer critique, like, you know, heteronormativity, for instance. Or, you know, with the biometric mouse that I did, this is kind of looking at this idea of scientific studies of gay face. But yeah, the newer work, I guess that's kind of slippier. Yeah, it's slippery, and you know, one way is perhaps a certain sensibility and outlook of approaching material. That might be how I kind of think about it. You know, coming into certain topics through particular frames, whether that's queer music, etc. I always think that there's also this element of the wacky in my work that I do really think of as quite queer, kind of taking the wacky seriously, and, you know, also, like I said, this kind of propensity for too muchness. So it's definitely hard to pin that down because, you know, I don't think the work is queer in a classical sense, but, you know, at the same time, I definitely think of this, you know, work that's like hyper emotional with tears and religion and submission to gods and this and that. To me, it's queer nonetheless.
Well, that kind of brings us back to the beginning of the show, your queer mother. Tori Amos. We're going to watch the clip that you selected for us, Cruel. Before we do so, we would like to give some closing remarks, and I think we have some slides to start with. Thank you very much, Zach. Thanks the audience, of course. We have a rooftop bar where, Zach, you are welcome to join us to hang out a bit with us and other people that watch the show for some after-show talk. And there must be a QR code probably that will bring people to the rooftop bar, queued in soon. We also have some events to go. We're of course preparing for the IMPAKT Festival, our main event every year. And that's going to happen from the 2nd to the 6th of November. Please check our website with updates. IMPAKT TV will go on a summer break. We'll be back early September. Also that, and the details about that will be announced on our website. So hope to see you in the rooftop bar. And if there's anything you want to say about Tori Amos and Cruel that you didn't say yet, feel free. Otherwise, we'll just, yeah? Go ahead.
Okay, I'll say one thing. So this moment in the song where she's singing quite high, you know, this kind of evocation of this idea of deeper. This is where the name for my installation at the Berlin Biennial comes from. So the Berlin Biennial work is called Profundier, which is Latin for deeper. And that installation is the kind of installation version of 576 Tears, where there is an AI god that exists as a kind of network system with all these tubes that is eating the tears of these computer graphic simulations of humans crying.
When will the piece open in Berlin?
The opening is the 10th of June.
Okay, we're all invited to go there on the 10th or later maybe. It's going to be open, I think, for the entire summer, knowing the Berlin Biennial. But now let's enjoy Tori Amos, and hope to see you all at in the rooftop bar together with Zach. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Preciousness, blown on she's got in her own neighborhood. I'm sure she'll make a few friends. Even when it bows down, let us pray as you can got your mind. No cigarettes, only beer and us for you. I can be cruel. I don't know why can't my blood stay in a perfectly windy sky? I can be cruel. I don't know why. I don't know why. Dance with us soon, we celebrate your down and in the charts of pain. I love a brother, bougainvillea, my vine twists around your neck. Keeping the rain is sharp like today as usual. Shock me. No cigarettes, only beer divine for you. I can be cruel. I don't know why. Why can't my blood stay in a perfect living sky? I can be cruel. Hey everybody, how's it going?